Hello. So we are still looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and I know what you're thinking. Still, but yes, we are, and we are nearly at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. We have nearly finished. Do you know we started this journey of going through the Sermon on the Mount 7 months ago? 7 months to cover 3 chapters of Jesus' teachings. 7 months. That's nearly 30 weeks. 30 weeks to cover 3 chapters. And for me, that just goes to show how important it is to sometimes slow down with the Bible. How many truths can we miss when we rush through it? I know people who have read the Sermon on the Mount and simply gone, yeah, it's all right. My hope and prayer is that over the last 7 months, you've seen just how life-changing and culture-changing the teaching of Jesus has been in the Sermon on the Mount. Today, we're looking at Matthew 7, verses 24 to 27. Which in my Bible is called The Wise and the Foolish Builders, which says this: Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. The wise and the foolish builder. How do you hope Jesus would think of you? Do you think Jesus would call you a wise or a foolish builder? These verses that we've read today start with the words therefore, which means that this what we've just read is clearly linked to what has come before. Now, in most Bibles, there is a break between verses 23 and verses 24, but this word therefore shows that there shouldn't be a break, that in fact this teaching is in fact connected to verses 21 to 23. Remember, we should never take verses out of context and just take them in isolation without understanding the whole picture. Jesus, at this point, has just finished talking about the fact that there are many people who will cry out, Lord, Lord, and his response will be that he never knew them. Why? Because they're not in relationship with him, as we covered last week. Why? Because they haven't listened to him. And remember, there is a difference between listening and hearing. You can hear a noise, acknowledge it, and move on. But when you listen, you are attentive, you are intentional. When you have heard, when you've listened to something, and that thing will make a difference, and you will respond accordingly. That's what happens if we listen. If you hear, you can dismiss it. Being in relationship with people and our Saviour means that listening intentionally to Him and others and acting upon what Jesus has said is the root of our relationship with Him. Communication. Jesus says that there are many people who think they know Him, but He doesn't know them. These are people who have not listened to Him and acted upon it. So here in these short verses, Jesus gives us all the answer to how we can be a people who know Jesus. Here Jesus tells us how to ensure that when we cry, Lord, Lord, he will never say he didn't know us. What's the key? Being a wise builder. Being a wise builder means listening to Jesus and acting upon what he said. That's being wise. That's being in relationship with Christ. His words are life-saving words for how we live our lives in this broken and fallen world. We'd be fools if we ignored the words that would save our souls. If someone asked, how can I make sure I never die? And they were given the answer, but instead of doing as instructed, they simply just walked into traffic, they would be considered foolish in this hypothetical tragedy. Jesus' words and Jesus' way of living provide us life, love, and eternity. To not follow him and to not listen to him and do what he says when he is telling us how to live our lives, that is foolish. Jesus has just spent 3 chapters telling us how to live our lives in this broken and fallen world. The challenge is, will we listen to what he's saying to us? And when I say listen, I mean really listen. So how about you just ask yourself 2 questions today? Number 1, do you know how Jesus is telling you to live? And number 2, would he consider you to be a wise or a foolish builder?